Hello and welcome. This is my Lebrun 6-valve Cavalry Trombone. I don't know when I first saw one of these instruments online, but I knew I wanted one from the moment that I saw it, and it's sort of a bit like a bucket list item for me to have one in my collection, my very modest and minimalist collection. In this first video, I'm going to be talking about what this instrument is physically and how it works, and then in subsequent videos I'll talk about other topics such as why cavalry trombones existed and so on and so forth. However, let me just take the bell section off for a moment just to sort of make this a little bit more practicable to talk about. The principle behind the 6-valve arrangements was something that was designed by the famous New Zealand instrument inventor Adolphe Sax, who also invented the saxophone and various other instruments. He was quite prolific, even though he had a habit of being bankrupted several times. And the idea is that you don't need to use combinations of valves. Each valve can be used independently, and your 7 primary valve combinations that you can get on a 3-valve instrument are instead represented by 6 individual valves, plus the fact that you can also create a tone with no valves pressed at all. In every other brass instrument that I know of, your fundamental pitch is the pitch that you play with no valves pushed down or your slide all the way in. That's your fundamental position, and your valve combinations lower the pitch, or your slide lowers the pitch from that fundamental position. In this instrument, it's different. You get your fundamental pitch by holding the first valve down. Your first valve is your fundamental pitch. It's true that the other valves then lower the position a semitone each at a time. So if this was B flat, that would be A, that would be A flat, that would be G, that would be G flat, that would be F. And then to get your 7th position, or your, the equivalent of first, second, and third, you would have all your valves open. This is your lowest pitch, and I'll show you what that sounds like. The next assumption that I'd made is that even though the instrument is designed so that you use each valve individually and not in combinations, I had assumed that you could use the valves in combination if you wanted to. Turns out that the valve block has got a particularly unusual design where that is not possible. The first valve out of the sequence that you push down is the valve that you get regardless of what happens afterwards. So if you were to push the first valve down, you could wiggle away at all the rest of the valves and nothing would change in the sound. The reason for that is because of the way that the air transmits through the valve block. You'll observe that the valve block has 2 pathways through it, one that goes in through the valve block and one that comes out. When you push a valve down, it connects this top pathway, the in pathway, with the out pathway and blocks off everything that comes after that. So if we hold the first valve down, the air goes through from the mouthpiece, through the lead pipe, through this lower crook of the instrument, in through the top pathway. You're then using the first valve, so it goes through the first valve tuning slide, which is on the other side. The air comes in at the bottom pathway and then goes out through this tube, which is normally connected to the bell section. All of the rest of the instrument is ignored. Same thing if you press the third valve, the air goes through the main lead pipe, the bottom crook, it goes through the first 2 valves, through the third valve tuning slide, which connects it to this bottom pathway, and then it comes out through the instrument. That continues through all 6 valves. If you use none of the valves, then the air goes through the instrument, through the top row of the first valve block, through the top row of the second valve block, through the bottommost loop of tubing, in through the bottom valve block again, through the top valve block at the bottom pathway, and then through the instrument. The consequence of this design is that the further you go through the instrument, the amount of resistance is dramatically increased. It's very, very difficult to play this instrument with the 5th valve or the 6th valve or no valves at all. The resistance is increased dramatically each time. Trombonists out there will know that you only use your 5th, 6th and 7th slide positions when you're playing lower down in the instrument's range. If you go from sort of middle range and up, you don't actually need those positions. And it's the same with this instrument. and if you're in a middle range or above, you're only really using the first 3 or 4 valves, and the instrument becomes tolerable to play. I say tolerable quite loosely though, because nothing I have ever played before has prepared me for the valve combinations on this. The valve combinations are completely different to anything I've ever played before, and it's a real cognitive effort to try and play a tune or even a scale. It helps to think of this in slide positions. You see a note that might be 3rd position on a slide, you press the 3rd valve down. See a note that might be 4th position on a slide, you press the 4th valve down. It's the only way I can sort of calculate in my head how I need to play this, and perhaps with a bit of practice I'd get a little bit better at it. In the meantime though, I'm still left struggling with scales and very simple melodies, as you'll observe in this next little section. Thanks for watching.